Okay, next one is A Leap of Faith, Anura Rising, book number 1 with a kingdom-building fantasy LitRPG series. That's all the title. Written by J.S. Gorky. It is 370 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, so that's always nice. And here is the author's description, which is thankfully not too long. Every frog has his day. Deep in the bayou of Louisiana, Henry's life has been shattered. He's never expected a second chance, a way to redeem himself. He's been given an opportunity to return to his family if he can fight off the evil threatening to take over Anura. All Henry has to do is understand his new abilities, build a kingdom, form an army to stand against the impending doom in this new fantasy world. There's just one problem. He has to do it as a frog. Leap of Faith is there you go. It's a bunch of back matter. So that's the novel description. And it's fairly accurate. I think the tonally, the actual novel is a lot darker than what's kind of hinted at here. The story for me, I kind of have mixed feelings. Like, there are definitely aspects that I enjoyed. Specifically, good action, like really good action. I really enjoyed the combat here. Nice, visceral, good feel for it. Nice descriptions. And there are plenty of notifications, item descriptions, character sheets, after a certain point in the story, which I'll talk about in a bit. And there is town building mechanics in the story, and it's well done and it's well thought out. I don't think it's as impactful in the story as it might be in the second or third book in the series. It's just kind of starting out, but there is good, well thought out town building with lots of little notifications and prerequisites and resource gathering requirements. And it does exist there. You can't tell it's again something that's planned out though. But that's kind of all I liked about the story. Those are probably the aspects I like the most about it. And part of this, I think, might just be the writing style for the author, because I looked at my notes for his other LitRPG story, Quest Accepted. I think it's XP Unlocked. And I noted similar issues in that story that I have in this one. So if you are a fan of this author, you're probably gonna like this story as much, if not more than that one. If you like that story, you're gonna like this one as well. So, but for me, there are just the issues that stop me from enjoying it. The first 23% of the novel in general and specifically read more like a fantasy novel than a LitRPG story. There are exactly 3 notifications in the entire first 23%. There's 1 character sheet, there's 1 item description, there's 1 quest notification. That's it. The rest of it, really just feels like it's portal fiction, which is perfectly fine. That it gets crunchier later after the 23% mark, but that first 23%, like, is this going to be LitRPG? And it kind of sets a tone for some sections in the story, in that the game mechanics aren't as important as the story, and that's definitely a note that comes through in the story, and that sometimes the story just doesn't reflect some of the math and the numbers accurately, or it just doesn't have descriptions that show that they're important. I'll get to that in a second, exactly what I mean. But again, after that 23% mark, the RPG stuff is more prominent. There are character sheets, there are skill builds, there are plenty of like town building mechanics. So there's definitely like more crunchier notifications. The town building stuff comes in after the 50% mark of the story. But there's issues with those mechanics feeling like there are actually impactful. There's like a lot of notifications and a lot of numbers. There are definitely places where you could tell, again, the story is taking precedence over these actual mechanics being followed. Specifically, sometimes the main character will choose stat increases, and they don't feel like they really have an impact on the story, in that he'll double or triple his stats by the end of the story. And he doesn't really seem as powerful as he potentially should have. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that there's no place of comparison to say that, oh, this particular number means he's really strong or he's doing a ton of damage. There are damage numbers for items and weapons, but again, there are no damage notifications in actual combat. There is no view of hit points for enemies, and so there's no way to actually see, if him increasing his strength really is having an impact. He's kind of supposed to be this badass fighter the entire novel. That thread is carried through despite whatever odds he's facing. So him increasing stats or increasing other characteristics doesn't always feel in the story like it's impactful. Again, part of that is just a lack of information about, how is this change in number actually impacting damage or hit point losses, because that information doesn't exist. You do get some for his allies, you get some for the main character, but again, not in actual combat. So that's one of the things that kind of made that less impactful. Let's see. Yep. And so fights feel sometimes more like they're a fantasy description, which again kind of plays into like what that first 23% was, in that a lot of those early cultural descriptions, the main character arriving on this world, his interactions with those other monster characters feels very fantasy-esque, instead of like everything being grounded in this RPG rule system. So it is what it is. Story-wise, there are issues for me as well, in that a lot of the story feels forced for me. I actively dislike the first 5%, and I just generally don't say that. And part of this is the fact that the main character goes into this world. This is minor, really, but he commits suicide, and he's brought back to life by this immortal deity on this RPG world. And it kind of comes off a little bit preachy from the deity, in that he's dangling this hope of the main character seeing his dead family, in exchange for him doing tasks that are supposed to improve the main character. Like, I don't know, morally? You describe him as having this terrible, negative, selfish outlook on life and this solo journey, and these tasks are supposed to be imposed upon him, so that he becomes a better human being, or a better person, essentially. That's literally what's described as. And so it came off as a little bit preachy to me, and it just kind of lets this weird bad taste in my mouth. And for other people, they're not really going to care. They won't, and that's perfectly fine. We all have different tastes, but it was kind of a kind of a bad start for me. From then on in, though, I could kind of see that a lot of the story is crafted to set up like the town building mechanics in the last half of the story. There is a lot of action, which is a plus, which I've already noted. Like there's really good action, essentially every 5-10% of the novel. So it's a good action fest here. But a lot of the story just kind of feels, especially the first half, feels like it's there to justify the town building in the second half. And I'll get into a little bit of that. So there's really just like a bunch of stuff that set up the town building itself, and then like a show off with the bad guy, and there's your story. And a lot of it is, it's just kind of, it was like, oh, there are things happening here where it's like, oh, this is going to be the thingamabob that's going to save him here. And this is going to be the thing that he's going to have to use to be a leader, because it's literally just like the main character is forced into this role. And that's part of the issue I have, in that, one, the main character is a jerk for most of the story. He's not a pleasant person. So the story is already a little bit darker. So I kind of found it hard to root for him. So that was another issue for me. But again, the main character in the story is very loudly and repeatedly, he doesn't want to be in this world. And he's only kind of there because, again, that hope of like seeing his like dead family, all of them, is kind of dangled in front of him. So it was always this like weird motivation for him. And at some point, I'm like, if he doesn't want to be there, I really want to continue reading. And that's kind of the vibe the story kind of gave for me. But in going back to the way the story is forced, the main character, the main character is literally forced in the story into a role. And I kind of did not like that particular aspect, because I felt like he had no agency. He had no choice in what he was doing. Like, he's literally given this characteristic of noble obligation, which forces him to take on followers. And if he loses the followers or they die, the main character dies. And this one characteristic actually breaks the RPG rules that are established in the story. Because as far as the normal game mechanics go, there are two ways to gain a skill. One is with skill points when he levels. He can go through like this long skill sheet with like different categories, and he can pick different skills and he can advance them, which is normal and useful. Or he can like read a skill book and he can gain skills through that, even though that's supposed to be super rare. So the fact that he just kind of magically gains this ability, this skill that forces him in this position of having followers or dying, for me, that was like a huge red flag of like, oh no, this only exists to advance the story in a particular direction. I always dislike seeing that. If I don't see it and it does it, great, I don't really care. But the fact that I noticed it is kind of the problem I have. So it just feels like he's a forced character. And this happens again and again in the story, where there are different issues to the main character, where he's forced in positions where these different things happen, where he gets his magic widget, a plot solving later. And it just kind of bugged me. Another issue I had with the show is the fact that the main character is a non-human main character. And generally, I really like stories like that. Like, I'm really a fan of like little bit stories that are different. I like Life Reset for that exact reason. And I've read some of the reviews where they compare the two, and this one definitely isn't as good as that story. For one, the non-human main character aspect doesn't really exist. I mean, he definitely not a human, but culturally, the way he speaks, the way the other people of his race speak, the way their culture is, their experiences, how they act, it's all essentially human. And I think it's always kind of a wasted opportunity, because having a non-human main character, for me anyways, gives you an opportunity to just do some weird cultural stuff, have different histories, have these different outlooks that are different than what a normal human would have in this fantasy world. And that doesn't exist here. So even that aspect is like, oh, it's not entirely wasted, because there's still some unique skills or attributes or descriptions, but for the most part, they're just kind of human and they don't really stand out. So, and that kind of applies to all the different monster races in the story. They're all basically human. They just look different. So I'm like, okay. So overall, story didn't work for me. However, if you like Quest Accepted XP Unlocked, if you like the author's work specifically, if you're a fan of his work, you're going to like this. Like those things you like about those stories are going to work for you here. Like they really are. This is not a badly written story. It's just there were different points that didn't work for me, and it's been the case with the other story the author wrote. So I may just be a writing style for him. And so, like I said, there's good action. The story is not badly written, and again, some of the twists were surprising. And if you like RPG town building, you might like the second half of the story. It might be just the thing to satisfy you, but for me, again, those other issues of a forced storyline, a main character I didn't like or really root for, and a few of the game mechanic issues were just enough to drop it down from unenjoyable for not good. It's not bad. It's not boring. It's at 6 out of 10, which is not a bad score, by the way. It's just, this didn't work for me. If you have the same issues that I do, you're probably not going to enjoy this either. But if you don't have the same issues I do, if you don't have issues with those things I talked about, you might enjoy this. Like there's plenty of other reviews are like, oh, I really like this. And that's perfectly fine. We have different issues. We all have different things we like and like. But for me, Leap of Faith, Anura Rising, book number 1, gets a score of 6 out of 10.